Hi. Great. Well, I am so excited to be here. Let's take a look to see if my presentation is working. Yes, perfect. Hi, everyone. My name is Alison Bringé. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Launchmetrics, and I'm really excited to be here virtually with all of you at Budapest Fashion and Tech Summit 2020. For those of you that don't know Launchmetrics, we are the leading brand performance cloud in fashion, luxury, and beauty. And we work with over 1,000 brands worldwide to give them the tools and data that they need to create inspiring, impactful, and measurable brand experiences. So today I'm excited to be here to talk a little bit about benchmarking and what's happening in the world. You know, it's a really exciting time for marketers out there. And I think some of you guys, I mean, sadly, we're not meeting in person. So a lot of you that are dialing in to listen today, you're probably thinking, why is it an exciting time if, you know, everything's had to be normalized as virtual events in 2020 because we can't get together. The pandemic is still going on. In most of Europe, there's still a lockdown. And you're right, it is a crazy, hectic time. But I truly believe that amidst all of this chaos, there is creativity that's going to be born. And we know if we look at what history tells us that thinking back to 2008 and 2009, when there was the financial crisis, that it was the brands that actually doubled down on marketing that came out ahead, that came back stronger, that had exponential sales growth. And that's why I'm saying for marketers, it's really an exciting time for us because it means for those of us still investing in marketing, there's a lot we can do and a lot of ways we can help our companies. So I wanted to kind of start by talking about, you know, with all of this exciting things happening, you know, how it's brought a bit of complexity to what we have to see as marketers. You know, we have these two different generations that we market to in fashion, luxury, and beauty, or in general as marketers, and that's these older generations, which is the baby boomers and the Gen X, and then these younger generations, the millennials and Gen Z. And while, you know, baby boomers are not the largest population anymore, they're still quite important when it comes to revenue and driving revenue for our business. So it's important that we consider them as well as, you know, everyone is talking about millennials and Gen Z and how it should be the focus for your company. And, you know, I wanted to point out a few things that's interesting about those generations. You know, as they are starting to get older and older, they're starting to have more and more impact on influencing these older generations. And that is quite, you know, important. And it just reminds us that both are key in driving revenue for our company. And we need to make sure that as marketers, we're equally looking at how we market to them, what channels they're on, what mediums they like to be communicated on, and make sure that we are also on those channels or mediums. You know, the pandemic itself has exacerbated a lot of shifts that we were already seeing, a lot of things that technology was already starting to create disruption in, whether it was, you know, social media consumption, whether it was, you know, purchasing consumption. These are two areas that technology had already started to revolutionize. And just in the last few months, we've seen significant shifts that no one could have predicted. You know, I always joke about my parents and how they never were someone I could get on a Google Hangout or a Zoom call. And sure enough, they're Zooming. My mom plays Mahjong, I think, every day over Zoom with her friends. Like it's hilarious. And you know, you can see these numbers on my screen, but it's quite impressive to understand, you know, that the two who used to be completely separate, completely far off in the amount they were consuming through things like social media or new media, have actually kind of normalized. And if you look over the last few months from this BCG report, you can see the baby boomers and Gen X had an increase of 42% of social media consumption, where the Gen Z and millennials had 62%. And that's not really that far off. So it's quite exciting. And even to think about, e-commerce has grown more in the last few months than it has in a decade. So again, it's just such an exciting time, as I said, for us as marketers, and a lot of things for us to think about. So, there are so many opportunities, but at the same time, that also creates even more complexity because there are 3 times more touch points than 15 years ago. And it means that we need to be communicating with our customers at every stage of the journey at all of these different touch points. And it means that as marketers, we're quite busy. So while digital offers you these endless possibilities, it brings up these questions like, do I invest in owned media, my own social media channels, or do I invest in influencers? If I want to invest in my own social media channels, is it Instagram or is it WeChat? Should I be still investing in print media? There are just a lot of questions out there. And the truth is that what we know is if you want to connect with customers and you want to understand how your brand is doing holistically, you need tools that help you measure all of these different channels from east to west, and really help you understand what voices and what strategies are working and what's not working. So, Forrester said by 2021, $120 billion in the US alone will be invested in digital marketing. And that is a pretty big number. And if you consider how sophisticated digital marketers have gotten, they can do a lot with that small or large amount of money. But the truth is, what we know is this pandemic, it hasn't resolved itself. And unfortunately, we've seen a lot of layoffs, we've seen a lot of store closures. And at the end, for us as marketers and businesses, we know that budgets for 2021 are actually going to be smaller, even if that $120 billion sounds like a lot of money. So what that does mean for us is that the new normal will be creating smarter initiatives with smaller budgets, really focused on what the ROI of your activity was and how to be more efficient as you're planning your marketing strategies. So that's where I believe benchmarking comes in, and that's what I want to take you through for the remainder of my presentation today. I love this quote from the CEO of Montclair, and he basically says he's not willing to make a long-term vision hostage to a short-term mindset. And basically what he's talking about is brand perception is so key. Brand building activities are so important that in the midst of this pandemic, in the midst of, trying to reduce your expenditures, brands shouldn't sacrifice those things that they'll need to continue to propel their brand and their brand performance long-term. Because that feeling, that sentiment, that relationship with your customer that your brand has is so important, and it needs to not just withstand what happens in the next few months and the sales that you need to generate, but it needs to withstand forever. So really important to keep in mind as you start to build, like, what are these activities that are going to, help set you apart from your competitors. So, as I said, the big question here is how can we build smarter initiatives with smaller budgets? How can we make our brand stand out in the crowd? So first, you need to consider not just how you stand out from your competitors, but how do you stand out from what you've been doing? And what I like to say when I talk about benchmarking is that it's not just about benchmarking against the industry, it's about benchmarking against your own capabilities. And this is a great graph to represent what I'm talking about, because it's good to see where other people are, but it's also important to understand how you're performing, how much effort your team is putting into something and what they're getting out of it. And I want to walk you through a few examples that talk to both the idea of benchmarking in the industry and benchmarking against your capabilities. So first, let's think about, what the value of benchmarking represents. It helps you analyze your performance in light of what others are doing, giving you an unbiased vision. I think that is so important. You get so passionate about the work that you're doing that sometimes, you look at things with this like rosy-eyed glasses and you think everything you are doing is amazing, and you can't see, beyond the tip of your nose. So analyzing your performance and the performance of others with an unbiased opinion is quite key. detecting the voices and channels that are most important to your brand, that are working the best, that is also a key component of benchmarking, because you need to know what's working and what's not working. Identifying industry trends. So does that mean being in new mediums that maybe you haven't tried before? Is it looking at new kind of retail or shopping experiences, or the whole concept of direct to consumer? Really understanding, what is happening in the industry. Is it relevant to your business? Is it relevant to your customer? And deciding if you should enter or not enter. Amplifying and sharing results. So this one is something we always do when results are good, but we never do when results are bad. And I'm going to tell you a little bit later on why this is important. And lastly, digging into competitors. I mean, you need to understand not just if someone's better than you or worse than you, but why. What is their strategy? What's their secret sauce, their secret recipe? So at Launchmetrics, we believe to answer some of these questions, is it Weibo? Is it WeChat? Is it Instagram? Is it Facebook? Is it online media? Is it print media? You really need to have one currency to measure all of these different activities and benchmark them. The currency we use at Launchmetrics is called Media Impact Value, or MIV for short. MIV helps assign a monetary value to every post, interaction, or article, so you can see, again, what's working and what's not working. You don't have to take from me that it's kind of the standard in the industry. We've been fortunate enough to be recognized by a lot of key players like the New York Times, Condé Nast, a bunch of the big influencers like Chiara Ferragni, Ami Song, and many, many more have used this as a way to show value to brands of what they're generating, what is influencer marketing worth, what is PR worth, what is partnership relationships looking like. And today I'm going to walk you through also our voice methodology. So we believe at Launchmetrics, it's no longer just important to look at print, online, and social, or owned, earned, and paid, but you really need to understand what voices are driving value for your brand and your different brand activities. We believe that there are 5 key voices on the customer's path to purchase. So there are the celebrities and media that create that initial awareness about your brand, your product, your service. There are influencers and partners who are help creating that conversion, creating that legitimacy about who you are, what you're selling, what you're about. And then your owned media channels that create retention. I mean, if you've heard me speak before, at Launchmetrics, we love to say there's no one else better to buy a Rolex than someone who already owns a Rolex. And that's why owned media is so important, communicating to the converted and increasing your share of wallet. So I thought, as I said before, I would share some data. Every year at Launchmetrics, we do a report called Data on the Runway, where we analyze 400 fashion shows across New York, London, Paris, and Milan. Here you have the data from Fall Winter 19 and SS20. So in benchmarking, as I mentioned, you can always just quickly look at who was number 1, who was number 5, who was last place. But that doesn't really tell you a lot, right? Here you can see season after season, there are some big names returning to the top of Fashion Week in the top 10 or top 5, and some moving out. So of course it's exciting for someone like Chanel and Dior to see season after season, they're ranked in the top 5. But, to really understand how you're performing, you need to dig a little bit deeper than what's on the surface. So let's take a look. Here, as you saw in the previous slide, Chanel came in first place for Fall Winter 19 and Dior second. But what the data didn't tell you, because there was no data on that slide, was that Dior was just a smidge behind Chanel. And as, let's say, a PR or marketing person working for one of these brands, you really want to analyze, okay, maybe we were really close in the overall ranking, but what was it that drove that media impact value? What was the strategy? And here you can see, okay, well, Chanel had a tremendous amount of media coverage. But again, if we look deeper, we know this was the season right after Carl passed away. And a lot of the media coverage was talking about the passing of Carl. And really what that tells us is that, their strategy wasn't necessarily to get that type of coverage for their show. And perhaps even though they had a better media impact value, Dior actually did a really great job because they didn't have that bump from that type of coverage. We can also see here that Dior had a home run when it came to their own media strategy. So as someone working, let's say, for Chanel, you'd want to understand, okay, well, what drove all of that MIV for their own media? So let's take a look. So here we've outlined the different media impact value and the share of voice that owned media had for the top 5 brands from fall winter 19. You can see Victoria Beckham came in first place with 37% of the share of voice being owned media, and that's no surprise. I mean, for those of you that do follow Victoria Beckham, Victoria Beckham the brand, and the person is the same handle, so they reap a lot of media impact value, a lot of benefits from sharing of that, a lot of posts of her family, of David. Everyone loves to see that. It creates a craze. And then we see, Gucci also kind of beat out Dior when it came to that percentage of share of voice. What was quite interesting, though, when we digged even deeper, the highest valued post for owned media that Gucci had that season was 163,000 per post. Whereas if you look at what Dior did, their highest post was worth 238,000. So when you want to know how you're doing, how your content is competing against your competitors, again, you need to dig deeper to really understand what sets you apart from the rest of the crowd. So I mentioned before, it's important not just to always look outwardly at how you're competing in the industry, but also competing against your own capabilities. Maybe your team is doing great, but season after season, you should really rethink, what you've done in the past, what worked, what didn't work, and what you could do better. So obviously in today's digital world, amplifying your own message is so important. This is a great example pre-pandemic, but there's a lot we can take away in this post-pandemic world where everything is becoming digital and you really have to rely on different voices to drive excitement about your brand, your launches, your different brand activities. So this was when J.Lo was involved with the Versace show. And for many of you, you probably know this story, but 20 years ago, J.Lo wore this dress, the one you see on my screen, and broke the internet. Supposedly, this dress, this image of her wearing this dress was what inspired Google to start Google Photos or Google Images. And it was really exciting because basically at their show, she surprised crowds by coming out in this dress. Everybody went crazy. Everyone started posting about it on their own accounts. Media started posting about it. People at home that don't even follow Fashion Week started commenting and engaging on that. J.Lo herself posted it. And all of this amplification, all of this buzz garnered the brand and J.Lo and this dress almost 32 million in media impact value. So as marketers, it's important you understand, how did you create buzz and how you can recreate these moments in the future. My last example is, I said it's important to understand what's working and what's not. And here we can see Balmain was able to move from 20th place from fall winter 19 to 4th place for spring summer 20. And that was basically just looking at what voices are working and what's not. And they were able to see that, for example, celebrities and influencers weren't working. So for the spring summer 20 show, they collaborated with Kylie to do her cosmetics Balmain launch. And just this one post alone that you're seeing on my screen was worth 1.8 million in media impact value. That's 24% of the entire MIV from the previous season. So again, understanding what's working and understanding what's not to do better. I'm going to wrap it up here because I just have a few seconds, but make sure that you look outwardly and inwardly as you are planning your initiatives for 2021 and think about how you can stand out in the crowd. Thank you so much and have a great day. Enjoy the rest of the conference.